So, if you are unaware, the amazing people at BBC WM did host a fan forum yesterday at Molineux where Wolves fans were able to go and ask questions on a free floor to a panel of Nathan Shi, the manager Rob Edwards, and Matt Jackson, who is our sporting director for those who don't know. Within this video, I'm going to whittle over my thoughts on it. I've noted key points down, key things that encouraged me, discouraged me. I'm going to tell you who I thought came across well, who I thought didn't come across so well, answers to questions I thought were good, answers to questions I thought were bad. But before we do that, I'm going to give you a bit of a backstory on my journey as a Wolves fan, just briefly. I know that's not what you're here for, but it adds context to how I feel about the current situation at the club. I've been a season ticket holder now for 12 years, and that'll be a long time compared to some, not so long compared to others. My first season was in League One, but I've never felt such a disconnect to the football clubs I do now. I don't particularly have a fondness to any of the players at the minute. I don't look forward to watching us play football as many of the fans in the stadium don't. I still have my season ticket. I still go to as many away matches as I can, and I'll still continue to do so next year, but that's for more so for reasons outside of football than the actual football itself now, I will say. But that's just where I stand as I go into reading this fan forum. I was very interested to hear it as it came out at 1 PM today on BBC Sounds. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend checking it out and forming your own opinion. This video isn't me trying to express my opinion, tell you to have the same one. This is simply my opinion. It's not the right opinion, it's just my opinion. So the forum starts with Nathan Shi, Rob Edwards and Matt Jackson talking before it goes to the floor, and there's a few interesting little sound bites coming out of this that I'll go over first. The first is Nathan Shi saying that Wolves is the core asset of Fosun overseas and that the chairman watches every game. Now, my first takeaway of this is obviously, if the chairman watches every game, how on earth has he let it get to this point? I know he's not the chairman or whatnot, but how was Jeff Shi in a job for as long as he was when, as Nathan Shi goes on to acknowledge, several seasons, operations have led to this point. If he's watching every game, surely he's seen the decline since when Fosun started at Wolves with Nuno and building them blocks to what we are now. Surely, I don't believe he watches every game, the chairman. I simply don't. He might, but if he does, he's watching it with one eye closed. Because a blind man could see that we have been on the decline for years. But I was interested that he says that Wolves are the core asset of Fosun overseas. Because, of course, Fosun own many pharmaceutical, many housing letting. They're an investment company. That's what they are. And of course, Wolves are a massive Premier League club, and they will be massively financially equivocal for Fosun. And Fosun will be making a lot of money off of Wolves. But the main asset overseas is a big thing, and you'd think they treat it a bit more like we are that massive asset for them overseas, instead of the neglect we've kind of had over these last few years that have led to this forum happening, in honesty. And whilst Nathan Shi, I have to respect him because it's honestly not his fault the mess we're in. Of course it's not. He came in 6 months ago as an interim, only been appointed as permanently in the last 48 hours. But it's not his fault, and he is taking accountability for it. He has held this forum when we're at our lowest, when the club's at its most toxic, and he made clear in this that communicating with the fans is going to be an important role with him as chairman. So if he sticks to that, I'm on board with it. But these were the most interesting things I think he had to say. He also tells us that Jeff Shi will be leaving the city of Wolverhampton in the next month. Of course, that video, we've all seen it, when after the Sunderland game, Nathan Shi was walking to his car, Nathan Shi making quite a funny remark about this incident in the forum. But we've all seen it where he's been asked about Jeff Shi being at Compton. Jeff Shi, according to Nathan Shi, was simply at Copton to do admin stuff. Of course, when you leave a job, particularly of such calibre, there is the last bit of admin stuff you do have to go over and you do have to get finalised. And if this is the case, of course, it's a situation that's been blown out of proportion, and Jeff Shi shouldn't have anything to do with the club. And Nathan Shi, to be fair to him, seemed pretty adamant that he won't. Also, another bit of plaudits to Nathan Shi. He seems to have done his homework. He referenced Raul Jimenez's injury and the kind of impact that had on Wolves. And getting to this point after such a good start to Premier League life under Nuno. So, this is the kind of stuff that, look, it's, as he likes to call it, the easy wins, but this is the type of stuff that we didn't get under Jeff. The footballing side of things seemed to be at the back of his mind, whereas to hear Nathan Shi talking about situations on the pitch and before his time of coming in as well, it is sort of a refreshing feeling, I felt, as a Wolves fan. It's something different to hear rather than the corporate made up, even at times ludicrous statements such as like relegation doesn't matter that we would get under Jeff Shi. So I personally welcome this approach by Nathan Shi. I think it's very, very positive on his behalf, and I actually think Nathan Shi, out of the three on the panel, comes across the best in this forum. Of course, he's done the least damage out of the three there, so it's an easy win for him. Again, I don't want to keep quoting that from him, but it is the easy win. Rob Edwards also spoke during this, and to be fair to him, seemed like he was taking a fair bit of accountability for a poor first 6 months in charge. He acknowledges he came away from a good situation at Middlesbrough. Of course, Middlesbrough, we know from last night, didn't end up getting promoted, but probably had a better chance of playing Premier League football than Wolves when he did come in. But I like this from Rob. I like the kind of accountability side. We'll get onto it way more further in the video because a lot was said, and Rob was in the firing line quite a lot during this forum. Perhaps rightly so, perhaps wrongly so, depending on what you feel. I'll get on to my thoughts as we progress. But Rob also said a lot of players have maxed out this year, which is his way of saying the players aren't good enough. Of course, he had that bit of a rant after Brighton, but he can't particularly just flat out say they're not good enough. I think this is a roundabout way of putting it. Of course, he still has 2 weeks with these crop of players. Further on down the line, him and Matt Jackson both insist that the players who they want to build a team around have been sounded out, and they know that this wasn't particularly directed at them. It's a certain bunch of players who will probably also know that it was directed at them after the Brighton game, Rob's remarks. But yeah, it's an interesting scenario where a manager just flat out admitting that the players aren't good enough, which of course they're not. We're bottom of the league by a considerable distance, have been all season, since game week 1 really. So yeah, it then went to the floor, and that's where we get on to the next part of the video. So once the fans that attended were given the chance to ask questions, naturally the topic of next season arises. Many Wolves fans scared for what the future of this club is going to be, dropping down to the Championship, and there's not much trust in the board, in the manager at the minute. So these are the questions that needed answering, and I've bullet pointed a few things that I took out of this as highlights. The first of all being one that worried me quite a lot. Nathan Shi says the club is not thinking about the possibility of Wolves not gaining promotion next season. And whilst I kind of understand what Nathan Shi was going for, at least I hope what he was going for, of not allowing a negative aura, not allowing a kind of failure mentality into the club, this is exactly what you've said in the first bit in your introduction, which is acknowledging several seasons operations that have led to this point, saying there's been years of trying to recover from mistakes. If you're implying we've been reactive rather than proactive there, having to have years of recovering from our mistakes, which is true, surely you learn from that. Of course, the objective is to get promoted next season, but you can't not consider the possibility that promotion doesn't happen. It's going to be a tough league. There's going to be tough teams in there. Teams that have missed out on promotion like Millwall, like Middlesbrough, like potentially Hull or Southampton, as well as teams that will invest more and more. Birmingham, Wrexham, Burnley. If Tottenham or West Ham come down, that's a massive club to have in there who will be flirting with the top of the league 100% at least. But yeah, I think this isn't the way to run a football club. There needs to be an A plan, which is we get back in the Premier League, we reinvest, and we get back to where we were. But there needs to be a plan B, or else we're going to keep going around in this cycle, and it's only going to get worse. Nathan Shi, you can't be... If you're really looking to change the culture, change the way this club's run, he can't be getting advised that there's not a consideration that we don't go up next year. It's ludicrous, in my opinion. Matt Jackson did emphasise, though, that the goal is promotion, but acknowledges that lots and lots of changes are needed if that's to happen. He quotes, "If there isn't alignment between everyone behind the scenes, then we're dead in the water before we start." And that's very true. There has to be alignment behind the scenes. And it feels like there hasn't been for years. Perhaps why Lopetegui left, perhaps why Gary O'Neill got frustrated. This board has been hard to work under. But that alignment has to also be correct. That alignment can't be too naive to accept the fact that we might not go up next season. Too naive to make a plan if that doesn't happen. That scares me. That worries me. Jackson went on to also inform us that every single player we get this summer must enter being either English qualifying or have enough points for a work permit to join us. Now, this is to do with the current legislations. Wolves can't now sign wildcard, as they call it, signings in the summer. So you like to see David Moller Wolves that you've seen this year, John Arias. They can't join next year because Wolves simply can't do it. They have to be abiding by these legislations, which could work as a positive or a negative enigma for Wolves. In one way, we do need more leaders, and perhaps it will help if those leaders are English speaking or have experience playing in the English football pyramid, which will allow them to work permit. Their points, to get a work permit to play here, but could also, it obviously does massively affect and shallow the pool that Wolves can fish in when it comes to transfers next season. So it's just something to keep in mind as we move into the summer. Then it went on to Rob Edwards, who, of course, the fact he's being asked questions and is on this panel says to the fans that want him out that he is here for the long run. We've picked our poison and we've got to stick with Edwards. But he was asked how he can ensure, and this is quite a good question, that another Luton situation with him doesn't happen. Of course, some of you will remember that Rob did a fantastic job at Luton, got them into the Premier League for the first time in their history, but then went down and was ultimately sacked in January because they were in that relegation zone and ultimately did get double relegated once Rob had departed. But he says you can't compare the two situations, which I suppose they are vastly different situations. Wolves going from being an established Premier League club down to the Championship after a long time. Of course, being a bigger club, having more money behind them than Luton. He also claims that a lot of Luton's money from being promoted was to try and make expansions to the stadium, new facilities, etc., more so than on-field performance, which hopefully will not be the case with Wolves, as, of course, the on-field performance needs altering massively if we want to return to the Premier League next season. Rob, just like Jackson, also says there needs to be a change in the mindset, a winning culture back, and we'll need new players. Again, a slight call out to the players that Rob claims when he came in were very low on confidence. Of course they were. They were on 2 points when he came in. and just simply aren't good enough. And it'll be interesting to see what players Rob tries to go for in the summer. Who does he think will have these kind of newfound confidences, new culture, and can take us back up? Nathan Shi, when asked about Jorge Mendes, who of course has been behind a lot of Wolves' best transfers over the years, but also some of Wolves' worst transfers over the year. He says Jorge Mendes is not treated any different to any other agents and won't be this summer, but still doesn't rule out the possibility of working with Jorge Mendes. But, of course, with what Matt Jackson said earlier, with the English players only being able to come in, that limits what Jorge Mendes can do in the transfer window. He might have a few players on his books who are eligible for the work permits and can get signed for Wolves, but I don't think Jorge Mendes, I personally don't think, will be a massive part of Wolves' transfer business this summer. And after some hesitation, which was a bit worrying to see, Matt Jackson insists that there are deals lined up for the summer. The way he answered it, if you've heard the forum, you will know, didn't film with confidence in the slightest. I think that this was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to him being pressured by the Wolves fans, because I don't think there is anything lined up at the minute, in honesty, the way he answered this. Perhaps there is, perhaps I'm wrong, but Wolves, of course, as Matt Jackson says later, they need to prove it to us, because Wolves have a history of being reactive rather than proactive. But the final thing that was said that I got note of for next season was a quote from Rob Edwards saying, "We're going to try keep the players that we think are capable." We saw a list come out a few weeks back, just after Wolves' relegation was confirmed, of lists of players that Wolves want to build their team around next year, and Rob claims that his words after Brighton weren't directed at this group of players and they know who they are, and I assume he's referring to them here. Capable. I think Rob throughout this was very choice with his words. He didn't say they're important. He said they're capable. He hasn't given them the flowers of that, but also given the compliment of "you're in my plans." I think it's the right place to probably stand on. If you want to come across as sincere and apologetic and agreeing with the fans that the players currently aren't good enough, but there are ones we can use in the Championship next season. So what's the future for Wolverhampton Wanderers? Not just next season, let's look mid to long range in the future. I mean, the first thing Nathan Shi said, quite hesitantly, I'll add again, that the mid-term plan is to be a stable Premier League club, but very hesitant to make any promises. Of course, if he makes promises, I'll come back to bite him in sound clips, but I don't think you can earlier in the forum say that you're not even considering relegation and then chicken away from making promises that we will be a stable Premier League club in 3 to 5 years down the line. That's where it needs to be. This needs to be looked back on as a key turning moment in the midterm. Well, what is now the midterm? Once we're in that kind of end game, so to speak, this needs to be looked back on as the starting point of getting to being a stable Premier League club. That needs to be the minimum. You've come into this job, and the net spend is shocking compared to what we've brought in. You're sat on a load of money somewhere from the lack of investment and the player sales that we've done over the last 3 or 4 years. There's got to be money somewhere. Being a stable Premier League club should be the minimum what you want to do in 3, 4, 5 years. And that might sound ludicrous with the position we're in, but you look at teams like Brentford, who go back 4 or 5 years with them, they were in the Championship and they could get Europe this season. So it's not that bizarre a thing to do. You just need to have the right model And that's what's so frustrating. And that's what they need to prove. Them three men sat there, they weren't shy to admit they need to prove to people that they are good enough at their jobs to be at Wolverhampton Wanderers. They haven't done that yet. So we carry on. Nathan Shi admitting when he came into the club, there was no ambition and no plan. I alluded to this earlier with the stuff he said in the introduction about always trying to fix our own messes as we go along. Years and years of neglect almost leading us to this point. And he's right, there was no vision, there was no plan. And this is a massive summer for him in proving to us whether there is now a plan, there is now ambition. Or is this just a Fosun thing? Are Fosun the overlying enemy here? And we've already got one evil out the door with Jeff Shi. Is Nathan Shi just another puppet for that? Or are you actually going to try and make a difference at this football club? That's what we need to know. Matt Jackson admits that himself, Rob and Nathan do need to prove themselves, I just said, to the fans, insisting if he doesn't, he has to go. And this was the highlight of Matt Jackson's speaking, I thought. Someone that struggled to contest with the fans at times, that I'll come on to in a minute as we just speak about some other things that happened in the forum. Actually standing on business a bit here and just, saying if I don't do this job, I'm going to go. That's the nature of the beast. And I like this accountability. I need to praise accountability when we see it, and that seems to be what this forum was all about. So yes, this is what we want. Yes, our jobs are on the line here. Your job should be on the line. You should be under pressure. This has been an embarrassing season. I'm embarrassed to be a Wolves fan at the minute. So yes, you should be worrying for your job safety. You should be waking up every day thinking, I need to do the best I can to get this football club back into the Premier League. Of course you should. So yes, I was encouraged by hearing this in the forum. Nathan Shi says he questions Rob after defeats. This was at a point of the panel where Rob fell under a bit of scrutiny, a bit of heat, and I thought, to be fair to him, he dealt with it quite well. Being told that a lot of fans have respect for you but think you're quite incompetent at your job must be hard to hear. But I think he took it on the chin, and I think he acknowledged why fans may have that feeling towards him. And, this was massive from Nathan Shi to say that although he seems to be standing by Rob, he does question him after games. Because, my opinion's changed on Rob over the last few weeks. His in-game management has been poor. And if that's being picked up on and that's being communicated to him, then that's good in my opinion. That's the kick up the backside he might need to change it. And like the Matt Jackson accountability, this is the accountability that Rob needs to have put on him. That's good. I like that. But Rob himself insists that the players aren't good enough, which we know they're not. But at the same point, try and find a way, I suppose. There's never going to be a way to keep this team up. But you can't put all the blame on the players, If someone brought up that he's now statistically the worst Wolves manager in terms of his record points to game of all time. That's not solely on the players. That's you failed at your job so far. So, but Rob wasn't shying away from that. He did answer that question head on when it was said to him, and said that there's we need to improve and he needs to be better. And I like that accountability from Rob. I think that's probably the best thing he's said in a while as Wolves manager. He was then asked if academy players should be utilised more, but Rob was very insistent that we need to be very careful with that and not to bleed academy projects dry. And I said this on my podcast, the South Bank podcast, a few weeks ago, that this is exactly true. I fully understand what Rob's saying here. Just because they're in the academy doesn't mean they're good enough. However frustrated you might be with what's on the pitch in a minute, an academy prospect is only as good as what they are. Just because they're in the academy and they might want to play for the shirt more, as supporters often feel. a lot of the time are just not ready for it. And Rob's right here, you don't want to bleed them dry. Not every academy project is Mateus Mane, So he's right here, you have got to be careful with that. But what I want to end on here, and what was a trigger point for me, and probably the part where I felt most frustrated, was when a fan says that current players have no pride, which they don't. If they had any pride, Saturday wouldn't have happened. They wouldn't have gone down the whimper the way they did. But Matt Jackson decides to attempt to stick up for the players, but gets a negative reaction, gets heckled for doing so. And rightly so. I mean, the fact that you can look those fans in the face and say that these players have got any ounce of pride is ridiculous. Because they don't. There's no fight on that pitch. We concede a goal. We always concede a second within 10 minutes, it seems. Because their heads drop. They've got no pride. They don't want to play for each other. They don't want to play for the badge. They don't want to play for Wolverhampton Wanderers. So where's the pride in that? And the fact, like I say, he can barefaced look at the fans in that room and say that there is pride amongst these players. And he did admit that there are faults among them. Of course he did. He can't say they're world beaters. We're bottom of the league. But they don't have an ounce of pride. And don't you dare try and tell the fans what they should think about that set of footballers. Because that set of footballers lets us down week in, week out. So don't tell us that they've got any pride in doing that. Because they don't. In honesty. But that is everything. The fan forum is over. There's still 2 games left for Wolves this season before they officially become a championship club next season. And let me know in the comments what you think about what was said in this fan forum. Do you have any faith in Nathan Shi and Matt Jackson, in Rob Edwards, to take us back into the Premier League next season?